What is the origin of the dragons we see in Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon? Are they just naturally occurring creatures in this magical world, capable of being tamed to the point where riding them is a possibility? Or are they the result of something darker? An ancient blood magic ritual where two creatures were combined to create something else, something new, and why can only select individuals ride them? Let me explain. Welcome to the channel. In this video, I will cover the origins of dragons in Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, and A Song of Ice and Fire. If you want to learn more about this universe, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. To understand their origins, I need to first explain what exactly dragons are, as their physical appearance can often provide hints to their possible origins. The dragons we read of in the books and see in the TV series are depicted as massive flying reptilian creatures covered in thick scales with 4 limbs, consisting of 2 large wings that act as front appendages and 2 strong hind legs, which in most fantasy worlds would mean that these dragons are actually a form of fire-breathing wyverns, as a typical medieval or European dragon normally has 6 limbs, consisting of 2 wings and 4 legs. There is an explanation for their appearance, which I will get into later. Dragons can grow monstrous in size if left to roam free. The largest Targaryen dragon was Balerion the Black Dread, who grew so large he could swallow a woolly mammoth whole. Dragons were capable of summoning forth an intense fire breath that could reduce armies to ash. Interestingly, their flames were often the same color as their scales. They were also described as magical creatures, with whom Targaryens or individuals with blood of the dragon can share a magical bond that enables these great beasts to be ridden. 5,000 years before the events of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, the Valyrian Freehold mastered these great beasts, using them to forge an empire that spanned across much of the known world. But where did they come from? The TV show doesn't really delve into the origin of dragons, but in the books, we are provided a handful of hints towards their possible origins. The first theory of their origins suggests that dragons are actually magical hybrid creatures. In the World of Ice and Fire, an in-world history book, we are told that the ancient Valyrians got up to some pretty gnarly stuff, practicing dark arts, delving deep into the earth for secrets, and twisted the flesh of beasts and men to fashion monstrous and unnatural chimeras. It is believed that through these horrific magical experiments, dragons were created. A combination of wyverns and fireworms. Wyverns were essentially a smaller, non-fire-breathing dragon from Sothorios, the southern continent. And fireworms were wingless, fire-breathing creatures that could grow monstrous in size. These fireworms lived in the vast tunnel systems around the 14 Flames, an immense chain of volcanoes on the Valyrian Peninsula. The combination of these two creatures seems to indicate that dragons are not naturally occurring, but are actually magical chimeras. This kind of explains why they take on the outward appearance of a fire-breathing wyvern with 4 limbs, and not the classic 6-limbed dragons we see in European literature. This idea fits perfectly and makes a lot of sense given the often horrific nature of magic in this world. It seems that the ancient Valyrians might have taken this even further, using blood magic to combine dragons and humans, creating a magical link between the two species. In the World of Ice and Fire, we are also told the following. The Valyrian Dragon Lords sent their worst criminals to the Isle of Tears, where they experienced a life of hard labor, torture, and experimentation. We are told in the dungeons of Gargossos, torturers devised new torments. In the flesh pits, blood sorcery of the darkest sort was practiced, as beasts were mated to slave women, bringing forth twisted, half-human children. This idea of half-human hybrids seems to be heavily influenced by H.P. Lovecraft, where half-human creatures are often the result of ancient experimentation or crossbreeding. Many in the A Song of Ice and Fire community believe that through blood magic, the ancient Valyrians combined dragons with humans, which created a magical bond between the two species, enabling these specific humans to mount and ride dragons. In effect, this would mean that Valyrian dragon riders were literally part dragon, possessing genetic material from both humans and dragons, giving a literal meaning to the blood of the dragon. Additionally, this theory might explain House Targaryen's rampant incest. The Targaryens seem to have recognized their bond with dragons was linked to their blood, coming to the conclusion that as long as they kept their bloodline pure, their children and future generations would inherit this same magical tether to dragons. The easiest way to ensure this genetic inheritance was to marry close relatives. For me, these two theories give a satisfying yet horrific explanation as to not just the origin of dragons, but also provides insight into the true meaning of Blood of the Dragon and the Targaryen incest. If this wasn't enough, the theory has even more weight to it when you consider some of the abnormalities that we see in members of House Targaryen, manifesting both physically and mentally. Some Targaryens are born malformed, misshapen, half human and half dragon. The most notable example of this is Daenerys' child in Book 1. We are told the following about Rhaego shortly after his birth. Mirri Maz Duur says he was twisted. He was scaled like a lizard, blind, with the stub of a tail, and small leathern wings like the wings of a bat. It seems that the blood of the dragon might be responsible for these physical mutations. But what about the mental abnormalities? A lot of House Targaryen experience dragon dreams, which are prophetic visions of the future. These dreams drive the dreamers to grow obsessed with their visions, and more often than not lead directly to their downfall. We see this dream obsession in Viserys in House of the Dragon. After dreaming of a son, he pushes Aemma Arryn through a number of pregnancies that ultimately led to her death. We also see this dream obsession in the books with Aerion Targaryen, who drank wildfire thinking it would transform him into a dragon. So it seems that these dragon dreams might contribute to the so-called Targaryen madness that seems to curse the family. Perhaps this madness is a result of their hybrid blood. It seems clear that the ancient splicing of humans and dragons to create the Valyrian dragon riders might have had a couple of unwanted side effects, manifesting as strange physical mutations, as well as granting dragon dreams that impact the mental stability of members of House Targaryen. For me, the origin of dragons being from ancient genetic splicing and blood magic fits so well. It explains the literal meaning of Blood of the Dragon, the Targaryen link to the dragons, and provides insight into the mental and physical birth defects that haunt the family. There is an alternative theory to their origins, suggesting the ancient Valyrians were actually taught the art of taming dragons by another ancient unnamed group of people from the Shadowlands beyond Asshai in the Far East. The edges of George R.R. Martin's world is often filled with mysterious creatures, people, and eldritch horrors that draw a lot of inspiration from H.P. Lovecraft. This means that whenever a strange creature or person appears, they are often stated to have come from the far edges of the map, clearly inspired by Lovecraft's fear of the unknown. This unnamed group would disappear from the history books. It is possible that they eventually became the Valyrians, or at least integrated into the Valyrian society, but we don't really have much information about this. There is also evidence that dragons might have once inhabited much of the world, with ancient dragon bones being found in the far north of Essos and in the jungles of Sothoryos, the southern continent, which seems to imply that these creatures might have once been wild and were simply tamed and subjugated by the Valyrians. Though for me personally, I much prefer their origins as magical chimeras created from genetic splicing and blood magic. It just fits too well, providing context to the Targaryen madness, dragon dreams, birth defects, and the rampant incest within House Targaryen. Perhaps dragon bonding and these rituals were indeed taught to the Valyrians by an unknown group of people, so maybe we can simply combine these two theories as one. There are also rumors of two other types of dragons in this world, ice dragons and sea dragons. Ice dragons were rumored to roam in the far north, far larger than the dragons of old Valyria, and made entirely of living ice. These creatures had pale blue eyes and ice-cold breath. This idea of an ice dragon sounds a lot like Viserion after being reanimated by the Night King in the Game of Thrones series. So perhaps, in the past, during the First Long Night, dragons were indeed risen to fight for the White Walkers. And this might be the origin of the ice dragon myth. In the books, we have not seen any ice dragons yet, but they are mentioned a couple of times, specifically in Jon Snow chapters. However, these mentions of ice dragons might just be poetic language that George R.R. Martin uses to symbolize Jon's true origins, being half Targaryen and half Stark, with each branch of his family associated with dragons and ice respectively. As for the sea dragons, less is known about them. According to an Ironborn legend, the Grey King, who founded the Ironborn, slew a great sea dragon named Naga that was so large it fed off krakens and leviathan, plucking them out of the oceans. This legend seems to be at least partly true. Naga's bones were used to form the Grey King's Hall in the Iron Islands, which still exists in Game of Thrones. But what do you think? Are they just naturally occurring creatures in this magical world, or the result of genetic and blood magic experimentation? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Cheers.